Quick reminder that everything I say in this movie is my opinion and my opinion alone. It is okay for you to disagree with my opinion, and if you do, feel free to share your opinion in the comments. In the past year or two, a trend has arisen on this platform, and I'm sure most of you are well accustomed to this trend, being that more and more there are animated pilots that are being put straight on YouTube, either because the creator wants to get this show picked up for an official platform or to just make episodes on YouTube. However, recently, and I say recently like starting from maybe 2019, but recently there have been more and more very high quality animated pilots. And in this video I will look at some of them, 5 to be exact, and see how well they do by being an animated pilot. Basically, I will look at how well they introduce the basic characters and basic world and get you interested in the plot and character dynamics without being dragged out or anything like that. And to make it fun, I will put the examples I mention on a tier list, granted only focusing on how well it is a pilot. Let's get started. Hazbin Hotel is the show or the pilot that started this surge in online animation. It proved that you can gain mass popularity by making a pilot, an animated pilot, on YouTube. However, by being the first, it also had to be the first one to make mistakes. So how many did they do and how many did they avoid? Now, as to what I think about Hazbin Hotel, when I was first introduced to the series, I was immediately captivated with the world and I found it very interesting and I wanted to know how it continued, and that was maybe 3 years ago or so. And it also introduced me in this same world of online animation. And it's obvious that it did the same for a lot of other people, judging by the fact that it was incredibly popular. Now, as many of you probably know, it is going to get its own show starting January next year. So it obviously succeeded in what it wanted to do. Granted, it took quite a long time. However, despite me really liking the video when I first watched it, looking back on it, I noticed that it had quite a few flaws, mainly in the pacing. Pacing is a flaw that I would find repeating in Vivzipop's work. However, it is incredibly blatant in this first pilot. In my opinion, the beginning of the pilot was incredibly rushed. It tried to tell the rules of the world and also introduce way too many characters than was necessary. I think Hazbin Hotel has a very interesting world that has a lot of potential, and obviously they wanted to try and show that. However, in my opinion, they should have only introduced Charlie, Vaggie, Angel, and Alistair, and maybe one of the other side characters, but have them on the side and not fully try and tell as much as you can about them. In fact, I don't think you should tell much about any of your characters in the pilot. I don't think you should explain where they came from, but just who they are and what their personality is. That is something that a few of the pilots I'll be discussing later on definitely did, and did well, better than Hazbin Hotel, because Hazbin Hotel tried to introduce the characters, make you like how the characters act, make you understand their personality. However, they also tried to explain who they are and how they feel. I feel like it wasn't necessary to say who Alistair is and how mysterious it is that he's so powerful. You didn't need to see Charlie having a phone call with her mom. I think the best example where they tried to explain too much in the beginning was with Alistair and how mysterious he is. You definitely don't need to explain that. You can see by just how he is that he is incredibly intimidating and incredibly mysterious, or at least that is implied with how other characters are around him. You don't need to blatantly tell that to the audience, and that is the same with a lot of the other characters. I think, especially in a pilot, you don't need to say how the characters are feeling. You just need to see how they act and maybe imply a little bit that there's more underneath the surface. But in a pilot, you don't need to prove that your characters have a lot of depth. You just need to show that they're interesting and entertaining to watch. Now, that being said, I think Hazbin Hotel would go in the D tier on how it executed things. However, based on just how popular it became, because of just how intriguing the world is, and despite it not really using its time efficiently, people still fell in love with the characters and the world, myself included. And obviously a lot of people just loved the video despite its flaws, so I think it deserves to be put up a tier. Now, Hello Boss, as many of you know, is created by the same creator as Hazbin Hotel and is successfully creating episodes and putting them on YouTube consistently, well, semi-consistently, and has amassed a large audience, bigger than Hazbin Hotel originally has. However, it all started with this pilot, which is quite divisive in my mind. On the one hand, I just didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoyed the Hazbin Hotel pilot, even though how it executed being a pilot was technically better than Hazbin Hotel. Unlike Hazbin Hotel, as Hello Boss has a lot smaller cast, and it did what I said the Hazbin Hotel pilot should have done. Mainly, it only showed the characters' personality without really showing anything deeper. Now, of course, the show later on would dive deep into how these characters think and all of that stuff, but I think rightfully so, the pilot didn't need to do that, and it didn't. However, I do have one problem with the pilot. Other than just the humor not really being for me, but that's more of a personal thing, I just think that it advertised a different show than it ended up being. Now, that was probably because the Vizipop and Brandon Rogers didn't plan it to be the show that it ended up being. However, it's still a flaw that I have to point out. How it was advertised, it would have been an episodic show with each episode being focused on trying to assassinate someone in the living world. However, that's obviously not the show that we ended up getting. In fact, including the pilot, there are only 7 episodes where they go to Earth, out of the 16 episodes, including the pilot, that are out as of making this video. So it obviously didn't really do as it was advertised. However, it still did a good job advertising something that it ended up not being. And to be fair, the characters still have stayed, for the most part, the same. And that is the main thing that the pilot focused on doing, was showing like, hey, look at these cool characters that we have, don't you want to see more of them? And that's what people gravitated towards, not necessarily the premise. And obviously it worked for their favor in the end. People are obviously loving the show that it currently is, and who knows if people would have liked the show as much if it was as initially planned. However, I still need to judge it fairly and see that it didn't do as was advertised. So that being said, I'd probably also keep it in C tier, but put it maybe below Hazbin Hotel because it was just not as fun to watch. Of course, I think it did a good job of introducing you to the characters, but not really the story. And a few of the characters, mainly Stolas, is quite different to how he initially appeared in the pilot, but obviously that is to be expected. However, I'm still pointing it out. Now, Murder Drones is quite different from Hell of a Boss. However, it is the only other pilot in this video that actually have multiple episodes out as of making it, and it is incredibly popular. And now, in my opinion, I would say that the Murder Drones episodes constantly get better with each new release, which obviously is a good sign for your show. However, that still means that the first episode is, in my opinion, the worst one. Mainly because of the humor was quite, how do I say this? It was a little too meta. However, that is not what this video is about. The video is about how well it was at being a pilot. Now, in that regard, it actually did pretty well with introducing us to the world and the characters. The world was pretty well explained. Sure, it needed a pretty lazy exposition scene in the beginning, however, it worked for that specific context. And the characters that are introduced, similar to Helva Boss, they are, at least in the beginning, shown with a very simple ideas of how they act so that you understand what kind of characters they are. And they are also shown to be pretty likable protagonists and fun enough antagonists. There isn't much more to say. Most of my problems with the first episode was things not regarding the pilot aspect and how good it is at setting up the show. However, one thing I will mention, that one flaw I definitely have with the first episode, which I think got better later on, is that the dialogue is quite strange, if I had to put it. It just didn't always feel like that's how people talked. However, that isn't a big deal. It obviously got better, and you also get used to how the show is later on. So that being said, I'd probably put it in B tier because it did everything what it was supposed to, but to be honest, it didn't get me invested in the story. Now, I watched the pilot when there were more episodes out. However, I took a lot longer to watch the rest of the episodes because I was just not all too interested in watching it. I ended up doing so. I ended up watching the rest of the episodes, and I thought it was quite entertaining, and I'm looking forward to how the show continues. However, I will acknowledge that the show didn't make me want to continue watching, despite it already having more content. And that is something I can't really say with any of the other pilots on this list. Now, I'll get straight to the point. Lackadaisy is definitely my favorite of the pilots mentioned. It has been a hotel, but it did everything right that it needed to. It's a pretty simple world to understand. It's just, it's the Prohibition, but with cats, and that's pretty much it. So it didn't need to do much with explaining the world, and that definitely works with its benefit with managing time. Now, as to introducing characters, I think it also did an exceptional job. The main three characters were characterized incredibly well. You understand how they are immediately. The villain characters, same thing. And even at the end, with the bar scene, you are introduced to a lot more characters that have a lot less screen time, and yet you already kind of understand how each of them are and how they think of each other and what their dynamic is. Similarly to how I explained what I'd like to see from these pilots, it didn't go too in-depth with any of the characters. However, what it did, and in my opinion better than any of the other shows have done, it implied things without getting too deep into it, and it took up no time. You already kind of see what's going on, but you're still interested into seeing the exact reasoning of this character's actions. And it just was a lot cleaner with its pacing and with what happened. And I think it also did what I think all of the pilots should do, basically just showing a day of these characters. I think it would have been a lot more interesting if the pilot of Hazbin Hotel was just an average day of the hotel, or if in Helva Boss the actual first episode would be there instead of the pilot. And this is something that Lackadaisy did, and did really well. It just showed the main characters doing a thing, and then you get a sense of their personality and their dynamic and their place in the world that they live in. And I feel like doing this is a lot easier and simpler than explaining everything about the world and essentially not showing the beginning of the story, but just showing the characters in their everyday life. Or maybe not even an average day, but just an interesting day. I know it sounds counterintuitive to have your introductory not showing how things started. However, in my opinion, or at least in this case, it worked incredibly well. That being said, I'm unsure if I should put it in S tier or A tier. However, I will leave it in S tier just because looking at how well it was at being a pilot, it would definitely go to S tier. Now with just general enjoyment and how good it was as a piece of media, it would probably go to an A tier. I am not really someone who puts that many things in 10 out of 10 S tier is the best thing ever. I normally reserve these spots. However, I think it's fine for in this particular situation to be more loose with it. The last thing we will be discussing is The Amazing Digital Circus. This is something that is brand new, made by the same studio as Murder Drones, and similar to Hazbin Hotel, has gotten incredibly popular and probably even quicker than Hazbin Hotel has. Now, it is obviously pretty easy to see why. It focuses on pretty much everything that the internet likes, being creepy premise, weird character designs, interesting world. All of that obviously was the perfect recipe for a viral pilot. But that's not what I'll be focusing on right now. I'll be focusing on how well it was at being a pilot. And I definitely think it did a good job. The world was understandable, or at least you understand what you're supposed to understand. Obviously in this show it works for not having to tell everything about the world, because it does have a mystery aspect to its story. As for the characters, it also did a very good job, similar to Lackadaisy. It had a lot more main characters than Lackadaisy. I'm not sure how many characters in general. However, for most of them you already understand how they are or what role they have in the group, and a lot is already left for growth and interesting drama and dynamic. Obviously with how it does its exposition about the world, it takes a very classic approach by having a character who doesn't understand the world being introduced to it, just as the audience is. And obviously that is something that is done quite a bit. However, it works quite well in this, in my opinion. I definitely enjoyed watching the pilot. I personally am interested in what will happen in the future, which I guess is an improvement to Glitch's previous show, Murder Drones, where it was also a mystery. However, I was not invested, or at least not after the first episode, but I am now, obviously. Also, side tangent, the music in The Amazing Digital Circus was definitely very good. Now, all of these shows focus on music quite a bit, or music is an aspect in the show that you notice. However, I think the Digital Circus theme, specifically the theme that plays by the really stuck out to me. Now, with that said, I'll probably put Amazing Digital Circus in A tier, because I don't think it was quite as good as what Lackadaisy did. It was incredibly tight and explained everything it needed to. However, I think it is still better than the rest, where it did a good job of showing the characters and how they're like. Now, obviously, I think it should be mentioned that the characters that The Amazing Digital Circus have, at least for now, seem like very standard archetypes that a lot of us are very familiar with. But as I think I mentioned earlier on, that is good for the beginning of the series. You know, it's a lot easier, rather than explaining this character's goals and aspirations and why they're doing and what they're doing. It's a lot easier, at least for the beginning, to say, oh, they are a jock, and then you understand at least what you need in the beginning of what their character is like. And then later on you can explain more about their character. That was something that Lackadaisy and The Amazing Digital Circus did very well. And despite that, even though they explained the characters pretty easily, you still are interested in how they will change, and you're interested in learning more about them. And yeah, I just think that The Amazing Digital Circus did that pretty well. In conclusion, I like all of these series. I am looking forward to how all of these continue, and despite their flaws, I do still very much like them. Please share your opinions on these series down in the comments. Feel free to mention any other series that I may have missed that are in the same vein that you think I might like to check out, or just talk about if you want. Again, feel free to share your opinions if you agree or disagree and why you do or don't. And that's all I have for you right now. Thanks for listening.